We've reached the point in the year where everything is terrible all the time. And so I'm just wondering kind of like how everyone else is feeling. Where are you at? How's your head and your heart? Talk to me. Yeah, same. Very same.
I mean, you said we've reached the point in the year, and that's where I was like, was there a point in the year where it was better? Like, I was like, okay, let me find out that this is seasonal. Let me figure out what seasons I should be looking out for because
right, like New Year is always the thing where it's like, you start all over again. But you're right. I take it all back. Everything is terrible.
I was on a road trip at the New Year with one of my closest childhood friends, and it was delightful. So I will give you that. Personally, the beginning of the year was really relaxing because I didn't actually start working until the day after MLK Day. So I had like a month off, and I think the last time I had a month off, I was like in school. So that was nice.
Wow, a month off.
Yeah.
That does sound dreamy.
That sounds really, really excellent.
I work for an organization that shuts down the last 2 weeks of the year, so it really wasn't as like hard to take the month off as it would have been otherwise because I didn't have to use vacation time for all of it. So, shout out to my employer. I really appreciate them.
Yeah, that's nice. It's like we're at the point what I should have said was we're at the point of the pandemic where it's like this has been going on for so long that like any sense of normalcy has been completely erased from my mind. And I kind of just feel like I'm walking around in like one of those like ant farm like toys, where like there's just these little like tracks and you just like walk those tracks all day, every day. You just like where maybe you'll find joy somewhere, but that's like pretty difficult. And also, why are we here on the planet, and what are we doing? And when will we get to see our friends again?
I thought Tiffany was like about to grab some like ant farm and show us like this is my life.
No, I think I'm at the point of my Monday where I was like, oh, I need to charge my laptop to participate.
Yeah, that's incredibly important for those listeners who are not on YouTube. Tiffany like disappeared for a quick second, and I was like, oh, we got visuals.
I just thought Tiffany was like, you know what? I'm also in a terrible place, and so I'm leaving.
Not quite. But I did receive an email from the administrative staff at my organization saying we're entering into the endemic or epidemic stage of this, and therefore we can think about returning to normal. And I thought, where in the timeline do we establish normal? How do we grab onto what that means at this point? That was really confusing to me. What does normal feel like?
Yeah, and it's also strange to say that when we are like not even at the November levels of COVID quite yet, right. COVID cases quite yet. It's like, I feel like everybody is just grasping at straws because nobody wants to say we've been doing this for 2 years. So there's been a flurry of activity in the last 2 weeks to just make it so that when we get to March 13th, we can be like, victory has been declared. But I definitely remember 2003, what was it, 2003? When George Bush did that. And I was like, you declaring victory, like, first of all, why are we here? And also, what is happening? And I just feel like I'm reliving the premature declarations of victory on this. I'm like, are you seeing the same numbers I'm seeing? Because
they're just choosing to completely ignore everything.
Well, I'm at the place where at least twice a week, I think, we are just sentient beings on a rock that circles a ball of gas that one day will expire. And we're all doing really petty and in the microscopic level meaningful things, but in the macroscopic way, like it's just like we're fighting all these petty beefs for no reason. And why can't I be one of those mammals that's just like naked with my boobs out on the beach all the time, living life? And sure, my life expectancy might be shorter, but hey, I'm going to ride that thing till the wheels fall off and it's going to be amazing. And I just don't understand why I'm clothed indoors, far from a beach, and not just out here, you know, participating in my primal urges and not much else.
I don't understand why
I don't understand.
I don't understand why
I'm using higher order thoughts, and I'm not just letting my genitals and the seasons decide when and where I engage. That's what I'm confused about, and I need someone to explain that to me.
I love this like new compass that I'm gonna start like thinking of frequently, which is my genitals and the seasons.
Yes.
Just like really directing. My genitals and the seasons are currently directing my every move. I like that.
I mean, yeah.
Well, my genitals and the season is not necessarily telling me that we should start the show, but
my genitals are. They're definitely telling me.
Oh,
your
like, genitals?
Oh, yeah,
okay.
Definitely. They're like, all right, let's get the show started.
Well, we got to listen to Flo's genitals and get this show started.
Let's do it.
Voices, the things they said. Voices, some from those dead. All the voices heard. Voices, things we say. Voices, they're in your head. All the voices heard.
Hey, everybody. You have Flo.
And Shannon.
And we also today have two special guests. We have Dave and Skylar today. And since this episode is being published on International Women's, it's actually Women's Month. And the beginning, I think International Women's Day is March 8th. So we're really excited to be publishing our first women-only episode. So thank you for listening. And we are excited to see where this conversation is going to take us. But we have two really special guests with us today. The first is Tifanei Ressl-Moyer, who is an attorney and is today with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. And then we also have Lyric with us today. And Lyric is a plaintiff, a local activist and a plaintiff in a case. And Tifanei is counsel on that case. And so welcome, Tifanei. Welcome, Lyric.
Hi.
Thank you. It's so exciting to be on the all-women panel of this podcast.
Pew, 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 pew.
Yeah.
Got my air horns. I'm ready.
I feel like, Flo, we should just do that thing in the Zoom background where we like make it the beach and then we can just like
be led by our genitals.
Just be led by our genitals. Take our tops off, be led by our genitals, expose our giant areolas.
Yeah.
And
Shannon and I did talk offline about how we both have salami-sized areolas and we're really happy about that. Yeah. Brown areolas unite.
That's right. That is right.
What's possible when it's led by women, you know?
Right, exactly. Let's do it all. I need like an option for like rock out with your like cock out. I need like something out with your tits out. Like figure it out for us. Let's let that be our puzzle for the day. But
it's our call to action.
Our call to action is somebody help us with our slogan for this show. So today we are really delving into a pretty heavy topic, something that we have talked about at some length, on this show, which is, community engagements with police, especially at protests. And so today our guests are here to talk about a case where the Sacramento Police Department engaged with protesters in the summer of 2020, which we remember after the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and there was lots of civil unrest and what people at the time were calling the racial reckoning. I don't know that we've reckoned quite yet, and in fact, I think we've now gone regressive. Mm-hmm. But during that time, there were protests, especially in Sacramento and across the nation, and the Sacramento Police Department's engagement with protesters is what we want to talk about today, and now a suit that has been brought against them because of it. So I'm going to start with, just for those who may be unaware, let's talk a little bit about, what happened and what's going on with this suit. So Tiffany, do you want to start with just telling us a little bit about what happened that summer that, led to this case being brought?
Yeah, thank you. This case we filed at the end of last year, so the end of 2021. And it really was seeking to highlight the consistent, persistent pattern of terror that the Sacramento Police Department has put on people who are advocating on behalf of racial justice in different ways that might manifest. So against police brutality, against organized white supremacist groups. And what our police department has really done is demonstrated to people that if you come out and you protest on behalf of racial justice, we have weapons of war for you. We have targeting as far as surveilling after, during, and even before protest, and intimidating words and harassment for you. But if you're an organized white supremacist group, we have high fives, we have sharing coffee, we have sharing jokes and things like that. And so we spent a little over a year investigating the actions of law enforcement. And found that the stories of community members was consistent across the board. And not only was it consistent across the board, but we were able to look at years worth of protest to see that law enforcement have been doing this for a very long time. And so you can see in our lawsuit that it begins highlighting what happened during the George Floyd uprisings, the just tremendous horror that you all have covered on your podcast before, and goes through the protests that were following the presidential election, where organized white supremacist groups were terrorizing the city, and law enforcement, of course, had their backs towards them and their guns drawn towards people who were trying to protect bystanders and protect passersby who were victims of the harassment of white supremacist groups.
I appreciate you setting that context for us, because I think a lot of people were paying a lot more attention to what was happening over the summer, especially the protests that followed the killing of George Floyd, and didn't necessarily even see the same news coverage of what was happening with the white supremacist groups following the election, and that was happening week after week over a period of time. So Lyric, I'd like to come to you now, and to begin to have you tell us your story. How did you get involved in, you're a local activist. How did you get involved in this kind of work?
I guess you can say I've been involved in this since I was in high school. I've always been I used to call it civil rights minded. Started off just pro-black, that's all I focused on. Then I got into the anti-capitalist stage of things, the anti-fascist stage of things. Wasn't protesting because I was just underage and my mom's not going to let me walk out to a wild protest. But then once I became of age, I'm not sure who was leading the protest, but I'll go out with certain killings that would happen and when people would gather in SAC. And then time flies, George Floyd. It gets crazy. And then fast forward, I think the activist scene just kind of started picking up and picking back off of all the stuff happening. And so whenever I was free, I would just involve myself in that, because I'm not someone, I've always been if you're going to talk about something, be about something. So as somebody who used to be very vocal in high school about issues surrounding just our community, naturally I'm going to go out to these protests and try to get involved as much as I can. And then now we're here.
And so did you notice a difference, in terms of your own experience from what happened at previous protests versus what happened in the summer of 2020?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. It was just more violent on the police behalf.
And so tell us a little bit about your story. What was your experience? What protests did you attend and what happened to you?
Are we talking about like from the past couple years or just strictly the George Floyd eras?
Well, you can maybe tell us about some of your previous protests, involvement and just like what that experience was like, and then bring us forward to the George Floyd protest in terms of what happened there.
I would say before the George Floyd, it was, it's normal protesting. The cops are going to follow you because naturally they're going to follow the protest. They might harass you a little bit, but it really wasn't until George Floyd and above to where, honestly, the cops just seemed tired of it. Like, they straight up did not care about harassing you. I don't even think they care if what they do is illegal. Well, they just don't. And the harassment became way more in your face. It almost seemed personal against all the protesters. Like, they had a personal issue with this. And I feel like from the George Floyd on, they just don't care. Like, they don't care how violent they are with you. And that's the biggest difference. Is like, you can kind of tell the cops, like, iffy, like, these protesters don't like us, but whatever, we're not going to start nothing. And then from George Floyd on, they're like, no, you are the enemy, and we're going to treat you as such. And that's the biggest difference I've seen. And that's lasted all the way up until now.
So you're saying that in the initial protest, there was still a level of harassment, but it felt maybe a little less personal than the harassment, because I heard you describe them following the protests and experiencing some harassment. And I'm sure to a lot of our listeners, you're thinking, that doesn't sound like, it sounds like the baseline was terrible. So is that your experience, that it was still harassment at the time? They were still doing things that were, beyond the fray, but that it amplified and just got worse in the summer of 2020.
I mean, now that you bring it up, that makes sense. Yeah, it was never normal. It's always been harassment and being mistreated. That's just my normalcy. I don't expect the police to not mistreat me. So I think I'm calling the normalness before George Floyd, it was still harassment. It just was not, like, as bad. There was never a normal, now that I'm saying it. They were always harassing us. They just kind of stepped it up after George Floyd. And
so talk to us about, like, the incidents that are now a part of this lawsuit against the city. What happened? What was your experience?
Gosh, there's so many. Let me think for a second. I'm probably leaving out certain specific incidents, but really the common denominator in my experience personally has just been the police literally stalking me. Not only do they harass you at protests, like, of course they hit you with bikes. They pointed out, they don't know, they probably know now, they didn't know my actual name. And they used to call people out by name just to kind of mess with us, I think, make us scared. But me personally, there's been a couple times where I'll be at a protest and I'll literally hear one of the cops on the walkie-talkie, the person right there wearing this, and this in the middle left, and that's how they'll describe you. I've had a time where before a protest, I'm just meeting with friends, we're checking in for safety reasons, and the bike cops will pull up. And literally it's the weirdest thing. They pulled up and just stared at us. Just a group of them, just right maybe a couple feet in front of us, staring at us. And I remember them pointing to us, and they were like, well, if anything goes wrong at this protest, you guys are getting arrested first, right? And me, being the shit talker that I am, I was like, that's not how the law works. You cannot just arrest this group of people because you've seen us first, and you think we're responsible for it. And I don't think they like people that actually know the law. They just do a lot of things to really get in your head, and I think they think that was like their way of checking us, like, okay, guys, we can't do anything crazy. But really, they were just trying to scare you. They followed me home multiple times. They followed me to friends' homes. They'd use drones to follow me home, which was the funny part. They think you don't notice a drone literally following you from a protest to someone else's home, but I caught it on camera. I've stopped taking my car to protests personally because they know my car very well. And kid, no exaggeration, after almost every single protest, I would be pulled over for something. It's something they do very normally. They pull a lot of people over after protests. I don't know why, probably just to harass us, maybe just to fill their quotas. But I had to stop taking my car because every single time I left, I was pulled over. for something. I remember one time, and I had this on my dash cam, they pulled me over because they said I was driving on the wrong side of the road when I was very clearly on the right side of the road. And they did not stop harassing me until I had my friends pull up to cop watch. And then magically, we're just going to let you off with a warning. Like, it's stuff like that. And it's just constant harassment.
And the harassment starts at the protest. So you're saying with, as you're even, just gathering together before protests start, they're issuing threats. And then it continues on throughout the protest. Can you talk a little bit about some of the protest experiences while you were out there in terms of how the police engaged with you?
For me, just speaking on my experience with some people, they just have different experience with the police. For me, it's just a lot of targetedness. They stare at you, they describe your block. If they're trying to, because they cut off the protests in certain routes, that happens. If you're a bit too close to the back of the line, they're trying to move you along, they might just hit you with the bike cop. Not hit you with the bike cop. The bike cops will hit you with their bike. Stuff like that. I've had cops, I'm sure it's rubber bullet guns, that they are just, holding and aiming towards me before, when the crowd was maybe in front of the SAC jail, and you know how they have the barricade and we're just in front of there chanting. I had a cop just pointed at me. Because to scare me, maybe they're on a power trip, I don't know. I've been pushed by cops. I've seen a whole lot of violence, a whole lot of throwing, pushing, rubber bullets flying. And then they also do this really weird thing where they will issue this has happened to me a lot. They issue I think it's called a dispersal warning, to where they're like, y'all need to leave or arrest will happen. So we're like, okay, let's leave. But then they block off every single route we try to take to leave. And then this one time we were cornered and we had nowhere to go because they are literally blocking off every street we're trying to take. And I've said it myself, I've heard other people say it, we will literally speak to the cops and be like, we are trying to leave. You told us to leave. You're blocking off the path to our cars. We want to leave, you want us to, but we can't. And they will just not say anything to us. And then after a certain point, I think after a couple times this happened on protest, you realize, oh, you're doing this because you want to arrest us. And eventually, when we have nowhere to go, they're like, okay, final warning, this is a dispersal order, you need to leave. Oh, you guys can't, we're just going to arrest you. And then people start getting arrested. I haven't been arrested, luckily. But they have snatched people. And I don't mean just walking up hey, we warned you. I mean, they will grab your arm and pull you, which is another reason if you kept up a protest. You see a lot of people don't like to hang out in the back of the crowd because cops snatch us up. And then even if I've gotten out of a protest, like I said, I get pulled over. It's just a lot of that type of harassment. Them literally trying to trap us and make our lives hell. Even if they arrest us and the charges don't stick, they're still going to arrest us. It's just really petty on the officer's part, and a really messed up thing that you notice when you're at the protest a lot is this is all a joke to them. They really don't care. They'll be laughing, making jokes with each other, making jokes while in the back of their car. It is like a game to them. And I think that's one of the most, almost kind of sadistic parts of this that I've seen.
And make no mistake about it, Lyric's experience is not unique, right? There are 5 other identified plaintiffs on this case, and that's really representative of an entire community's experience. It might, a listener might hear and think, okay, a cop is stopped on his bike and he says something rude to you. How does that reach the level of unconstitutionality? But this is a pattern and practice that they do in order to create this culture in the community that if you're coming out here to protest against against racism or white supremacy, we will be on you. We will follow you home. We will make people who are around you feel unsafe. We will make your family members feel unsafe. Say they're driving your car and now they're scared because the police are following you and you're outside. That we have people who have shared with us that they're being followed around by drones just because they're participating in these protests. Can you imagine that level of aerial surveillance into your private life because you've decided to say you're against police brutality, because you've decided to say you are against organized white supremacist activity in your city? It is truly an amazing power of the state that they are absolutely exploiting and abusing and creating very real terror and very real psychological harm in people.
So talk to us, Tiffany, a little bit more about the other plaintiffs in the case. And like you talked about this pattern, right, of things that are happening. What are the things that were documented that happened to people who participated in these protests?
So there are a number of people with a relative diverse amount of experience. So people who would come out to protest with a very explicit intent to provide aid to people. Right. A number of people showed up to the George Floyd protests, not because they're protesters themselves or have a long history of protests like Lyric does here, but because they heard of how horrendous it was. And so they came with first aid kits. They came with, legal observer hats or self-identified medical care. And what they found were that law enforcement were targeting them specifically because they were identified as helping the people who were protesting. Or if they came out and they tried to help somebody specifically, law enforcement would target that person they were trying to help as well as them with rubber bullets or with tear gas canisters. There were other people who showed up during the counter demonstrations to white supremacist gatherings. And they showed up because they themselves were white and thought, as an ally, perhaps I can stand in between these white supremacist groups and these people of color that they're harassing. And law enforcement would watch these white supremacist groups beat the allies to the points where the images, the videos are horrific to watch. And
that's an important point, that there's video and photographic evidence of these things happening with police officers standing by doing nothing to intervene.
That's absolutely right. And what's the story that's consistent across the board are that the law enforcement would only step in to intervene if counter demonstrators or passersby tried to defend themselves or some other way, because as they were yelling at police to please help, do something, the police weren't doing anything. And so naturally communities well, we now have to defend ourselves or try to get our brother or get our sister or our cousin out of the crowd. And only at that point would law enforcement intervene. And that's a story that was consistent across the board. Complete inaction or inadequate action until the other side. Antifa, as they call everybody, without discrimination or without specific nuance.
As if anti-fascism is a problem.
Exactly.
In and of itself. I just want to point that out. Yeah. It feels a lot like the intentional misdirect around critical race theory in terms of it's just teaching accurate history. And if that makes you uncomfortable, you should check your own, philosophy about the world and who you are in terms of your character. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a page right out of the, what does political repression look like? 101.
Right.
The police create a fictional villain, and in this case it was Antifa, in order to justify the violence, in order to scare the public. You should be scared of Antifa. That's why we have all this force. That's why we have, all these weapons that we're using. And instead of accurately reflecting, what does Antifa actually mean? Who identifies as Antifa? What does that look like? Does everybody out here really support it? Do people even know it? You know what I mean? Actually asking those critical questions that you would expect a law enforcement investigative or, anybody who's using this level of force and resources against the community to do, but they don't have that nuance because it doesn't serve their purpose, which is to justify their use of force and to justify their pattern of repressing speech on behalf of racial justice.
One of the things about, as we were prepping for this show about this, about all of this, I guess, that stands out to me is this focus on the psychological impacts of these really horrible experiences that the 6 plaintiffs and so many others in the community who have gone out to stand against all of these oppressive efforts of the police. I'm sorry, I'm going on this wild train here as I'm trying to explain myself. Anyway, the psychological impacts that exist as a result of all of this, that as you were just explaining, Tiffany, first it starts with this whole like creating a fake villain, right? And then it goes into these incredibly harmful and violent acts that law enforcement, this like, you know, targeting people directly, kettling is one of the things that has been talked about here. Following people home, all of this stuff. And this is all like the police are still contending through all of this that they are here to protect and serve, right? Like that, and you submit this complaint, file, you know, all of this court documentation, and the city comes back to you and says, yeah, no, thank you, right? Like you did over a year's worth of investigation to not only be sure that you had what you needed to file all of these court documents, but also to make sure, you know, that you've got the story straight, this and that, you know, all of the things. And you submit this like I read the complaint and was like, wow, they brought in, you know, they talk about Donald Trump and bring that whole piece into this. And the city says, no, you've just like, this like history of racist policing isn't actually, we can't actually talk about that. Like, that's not what so what did the city say, I guess, is the better question.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you brought up two really important things that I'd love for people who are interested in this to understand, which is one, the psychological impacts, and if Lyric's comfortable to talk a little bit about that, and then also the city's response. So the city has made a number of arguments in what's called a motion to dismiss. It's pretty typical at this stage for a city to be like, just throw the thing out. Like, we don't want to even deal with this, just throw the whole thing out. And the city here argued that all of the references to the city's patterns in racist and discriminatory policing and the social context around their behavior should be taken out because it's just in there to elicit emotion from the court. Which is fascinating to me because it's because, one, I don't know who thinks of, like, when I'm talking to a judge, what I want to do is elicit emotion. That's not typically the goal. The goal is to, like, center the facts and connect them with the law. And so, you know, obviously, from our perspective, they're missing the point. Your history of racist policing is absolutely what informs your practice of racist policing when it comes to these specific set of dates and these horrific experiences like Lyric and other experienced. And so, you know, I'm laughing because like it feels comical. It feels comical that what they are trying to do is reframe the story, right? This is not a story about race or injustice. This is not a story about white supremacy. This isn't a story about racist institutions. This is a story about a few people who got harmed, perhaps by accident, by weapons that police typically have. Right. And so they try to reframe that entirely. And another thing that they try to reframe is, you know, saying that psychological harm isn't real harm. Right. They specifically call out two plaintiffs who had an incredible amount of emotional and mental health injuries as a result of this terror from the police. And they say, well, those aren't real injuries, and the law is not going to recognize that, not when we look at the Constitution. And so they are, it's funny, but it's not funny, right? If the city is able to make light of such an incredible impact on the community, and so much so that they asked the court to take those arguments seriously, we have a lot of cause for concern around the leadership in our city and what that means.
Yeah, I think, you know, one of what stands out, especially Lyric in your section of the complaint, is just that, and now after talking to you here tonight, is that you're someone who has been so actively involved in standing up, you know, against oppression. You have worked toward anti-racist practice, have shown up to racial justice protests and gatherings, and as a result of what has happened at the hands of law enforcement, there is not as much comfort to be able to show up and stand for, you know, what our Constitution says that we should be able to, right? Like not having the confidence that you'll be safe in that act, I think is so huge. And there's another plaintiff who talks about feeling like they can't, that last summer was the first time they felt like they had to wear goggles and wear a helmet and show up, like having to protect their bodies because of the violence from not only from the far right, but that Sac PD was escalating that violence.
Yep.
So I don't know if maybe, Lyric, you can speak to sort of like where you find yourself at now in terms of your level of comfort being involved in gatherings, in vigils, in protests, and any of these sorts of things as a result of your experiences from last summer.
Well, yeah, you definitely, the more protests you get to, you're going to start wearing gear, and that's where Black Thought comes in, because you realize you might go into it pretty naive. Well, I guess I won't call you naive for this. You're just expecting things to be the right way, but you actually cannot protest racism safely. It's just not going to happen. You cannot, because at the end of the day, if you're protesting, or even if you just have this issue with occasional police brutality, you're automatically against the cops. The cops do not like you. You are the enemy. That's why when we protest, they are on the opposite side of us. Like, we are enemies at the end of the day. They are going to shoot you with rubber bullets. They are going to damn near beat you with a bike if they're bike cops. They will, and they never simply arrest people. They snatch you from the back of the crowd. They're going to hit you. They tackle you to the ground. There's been times where I've actually watched in a protest. Oh, I forgot who it was for. It was a protest last year, and after we were done, we're walking back to our cars, no cops. These cops pull up out of absolutely nowhere and bum rush people going to their cars. And I've watched them, because I was in the car behind people, I've watched them open someone's door and drag them out of the car. And the person they arrested was a medic. Someone simply trying to help people. And I feel like at a certain point last year, people were like, oh, I don't want to get shot and get my eye shot out like the other person, get a rubber bullet through my jaw like the other person. I have to wear a helmet. I'm now wearing gear. I now have to hide my identity because cops and right-wingers will harass me if they see me on the street. And so that it depends. You either kind of stop going or you start blocking up and you gear up. And so now there's really no comfortability protesting. For me personally, I'm not going to stop showing up because I feel like in a way the cops are winning, and that's exactly what they want, but it's definitely affected the community because numbers at protests now are so little. Like, it is ridiculously small because people are not comfortable doing this. And it's really only a select group of people who are like, no, I know you're going to arrest me, you're possibly going to shoot me, but I'm not going to stop standing up for what I should stand up for just because police brutality. But, like, at a certain point, it becomes so few people that think like that it's just not safe, period, to be outside protesting anything.
I feel...
Yeah.
My silence is not, I think the collective silence is just... that, you know, we say a lot on this show that we shouldn't be surprised at so much, and yet we still find ourselves, I don't know if surprised is the right word, but it's this like mixture of surprise and grief and frustration and anger. And I think with this in particular, having again read through such a detailed court filing that really does show a history of racist policing right here in our community, and to see that the city's response to that, you know, and like as we hear these like very direct experiences from you, Lyric, you that the response to that is, hey, dismiss this, even if that is something, as Tiffany, you said, that is like pretty common. It does just feel, it feels like what it is, which is unjust, and it's trash because these are actual lives that have been negatively impacted, and psychological trauma is real. And the city of Sacramento is saying, no,
Right.
no, it's not. So I guess what I'm interested in is where are things at now? So everything was filed. The city has come back and responded and said, no, thank you. They'd like to, compel you to get rid of all of this. And I guess start over? Do they want you to, like, what is it that they want?
They want us to go away.
Yeah, they want you to go away.
Right.
They want you to
think
stop
exactly.
it right now. So I guess,
it's a good
where
question.
Are we now with all of
Procedural,
this?
yeah.
Right.
It's a very good question. And, it's something procedurally that I'd also like to highlight that you just made me think about is the city has had so many opportunities to answer to the harm that they've done. I mean, there were people immediately, May 31st, talking about stop this, here's what you need to do and make it right, let's move on. And I mean May 31st, 2020, right? Mm-hmm. So there's been multiple meetings. People have put their heart and soul into reaching out to the mayor, leadership, the police chief, before he retired, although the current police chief also was intimately involved with the protests.
And the city manager.
And the city manager. And the motion to dismiss, of course, they didn't have to do that. Of course not. But they also, it's not the first time that they've had an opportunity to own up to what they've done, come to the table in a way that's real, and respond, and they haven't. So what happens at this stage is we file a complaint. It puts the allegations from the plaintiffs in there. And before the city responds, they try to get the case thrown out for a myriad of reasons. The city here argued that they should throw it out to dismiss because we don't put enough facts in there to meet the constitutional obligations. They also say that a motion to strike is what it's called. So throw out a huge chunk of this complaint. It's not even relevant. We don't want the public to know about our racist history. And then they also are putting a motion for a more definite statement. So they're saying, like, even if you think all these things could go, they put way too many things in here for us to possibly comprehend and respond in an adequate way. And so the plaintiffs right now are currently drafting their response to this. That's due in a couple of weeks. And once that's all before the court, there will be a hearing on whether or not the case should move forward. A judge at that point will decide, should you amend the complaint, so just fix some of the facts that maybe the court doesn't like, or should we throw it out? And at that point, it would be a decision on whether or not to refile or do something a little bit different. But at the same time, a lawsuit isn't going to fix all the problems that we've addressed here. And so even as this is happening, and a lawsuit happens over a long period of time, Lyric and other plaintiffs in this case are very brave for undergoing this process because it asks a lot of them. It is representative of a community, but it does ask a lot of them specifically. And so we need people to be involved now. We need people to, to the extent that they have the capacity to tap into the other avenues for advocacy here too, as this process is ongoing.
So what, I guess, that's a good seg into a call to action. If people are listening to this show and they feel compelled to support this work, and this work as a whole, but then also like it just working toward a space where there is police accountability, where there's oversight, where like what is it that folks can do? What would you ask of the community?
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't at first highlight that there are current, inductions and recruitment ceremonies for these organized white supremacist groups right now. And some people who have participated in racial justice protests are being targeted by those groups. And so if you or you know of somebody who participated in these protests, first of all, check in on them. Before any of this other stuff matters, how we're keeping each other safe as a community is priority. And so I want to highlight that. The violence still exists. Even though we filed this lawsuit, doesn't mean it ended when we filed it. It's still ongoing. The other thing is that, the individuals who are part of this lawsuit really care about how it impacts the community, how it fits within our historical narrative together. And so we will be, having an events to bring people in to share what's happening. There's a lot of healing that needs to happen in our own community, so we're trying to do it, patiently and carefully. But that to look forward to that. Lyric, I don't want to speak over you, even though I jumped and answered the question first. But if there's anything else that I'm missing about what we wanted folks to be aware of and how to tap in.
If you're asking what the community can do about police brutality in itself, not to be the most unoptimistic person ever, but there's not much we can do because the police are operating the way they are intended to operate. We can't tackle racism when this country was built on racism. There's really not many things we can rally against and magically stop the police, because as long as they exist, this is going to exist. But if you're asking what you can do to at least make people aware, is literally just amplifying the voices in this lawsuit, the local voices, local activists, anything happening within the Sacramento Police Department that is unjust. That's really the most we can do at this point, is share, because the root of the issue isn't just simply passing more reform laws or this person got brutalized, here's a video, share it on social media. It's at what point do we kind of realize the issue is these institutions itself, and the issue is also this country itself? So at this point, we can try to hold them accountable with this lawsuit. That'd be great if we actually got something out of this. But I'm just happy that this is going to get some type of media attention, and I feel like the most impactful thing you can do is wake up the people around you. Because that's really all we can do at this point. We're not going to win against America itself or against the policing institution of this country. But what we can do is wake up people's minds, and then just keep creating more revolutionaries, and then we keep creating more education to be circled around. This generation, they're pretty damn intelligent. We are I hate using the word woke because I think it sounds corny, but we are a very woke generation, and pretty much just educating ourselves and then amplifying local voices in your city, which would be Sacramento. I thought that is the most progressive thing we can do right now.
I really appreciate you lifting up the what we can do, and I wanna kind of pitch back to Tiffany on this one. I'm sure there are other stories out there, right? You have Lyric, you have 4 other plaintiffs on this particular case, but what if we have listeners here? I know we have listeners here who are thinking to themselves, I have a story that, has gone unspoken. What are some of the options that people have? Can you speak a little bit to what they can do, and also how long they have to do it? Because I think a lot of times these things happen, and, to the point Lyric made earlier, right? You go to the protest and there's a baseline level of harassment, and people aren't even sure what to do with that, so they don't. It just becomes a story that we tell in the community, and it becomes part of the safety speech that we give our children, right? It's just this is what's happening. So talk to us a little bit about the other options people have to engage these institutions in the way that Lyric and the 4 plaintiffs have.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. And you're reminding me that there was one person I asked, about their experiences, and they said, thank you, because if you hadn't asked me, I would have taken this to the grave. That understanding that's been taught to them by law enforcement, that this is the type of treatment that you get. This is the baseline. This is normal. That we should establish as status quo, right? Instead of as the horrific experiences or incidents. And so that being said, we want to hear the stories. It is not too late to share your experiences, even if no matter what stage we are in the case, because there are always ways for us to amplify. And we want your experience to inform our strategies. And we want, there'll also be other opportunities to share your stories that will come up throughout the process of this case. So you can reach me if you go to lccrsf.org, a Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights of the San Francisco Bay Area. You can find my contact information there. You can also find contact information for the rest of the litigation team there. Our co-counsel on the case is CREEK, Civil Rights Education and Enforcement Center. They also have a website, and you can reach their attorneys there. But of course, we're all a team here, so you can reach all of us on any of those opportunities. And we can talk about the different ways that you're comfortable sharing your story, different ways to plug in to different advocacy avenues. There's people working on policy. There's people who are doing the healing aspects of this. There's people who are organizing. There are so many different ways to plug in. And there are people who recognize that some of the psychological trauma that you uplifted earlier, and people who need psychiatric services as a result. And so people are donating money for a fund for therapists who understand state violence, for people who both are represented on our case and who have endured experiences similar to those on our case.
Thank you for lifting that up. And lastly, you talked about how this case was a little bit complicated because of, the pushback that you're getting from the other side around, well, these are individual experiences, or how could we possibly do something about all of this, or just basically trying to allege some frivolity. And I'm sure there are people who are listening who would love to just maybe better understand a little bit of the legal grounds around the case. So, I believe that this is being filed on particular grounds in terms of, which rights were violated. So can you talk a little bit about which rights they were and why the case is being presented in this way, as opposed to maybe just a straight, you treated me poorly, this is just a police brutality case, right? It's being argued on slightly different grounds. And I'd be remiss if we left without people kind of understanding why this case is different and what's being argued here.
Yeah. Thank you for asking that question. Because you're right, it is a little different grounds than you might see in other cases. And it's recognizing that the systemic way in that police are moving is with a purpose. The purpose is to give the message that you're not safe to protest here if you're protesting on behalf of racial justice. And that invokes the First Amendment, right? We all have a right to freely speak. It is protected speech, the way that people were engaging with their protest. And by retaliating against people because of the way that or because of their viewpoints, or even targeting people because of their viewpoints, both of those things violate the First Amendment. And when you engage in acts such as these war weapons, such as taunting people in the street, naming what they're wearing, describing what they're wearing, following their car, following with drones, stopping them in their vehicles, all of those things chill somebody's speech. That's the language that the Constitution considers. It chills your speech. So it makes people feel like I'm not safe to do this, and therefore I'm not going to come out. The incredible psychological impacts on people is also a form of chilled speech, right? If your anxiety is so high that you can't walk in downtown Sacramento anymore, that is chilled speech. And so we're really focusing on the First Amendment. And then, of course, like you mentioned, the Fourth Amendment, excessive force, when you're using these war weapons against people who are kneeling on the street, that obviously is a clear constitutional violation. We're leaning on the 14th Amendment as well, which says equal treatment. Right. If you're treating one group of protesters who might oppose some of your actions different than another ones who are organized white supremacists, you're violating the 14th Amendment in our civil rights laws in that way. And we even have one plaintiff who had experienced discrimination due to their disability. This person experienced seizures, and law enforcement completely dismissed that and put them in great danger of harm. And that's so some disability discrimination claims are also present.
And very common as we talk about, the intersections of our identities, like those identities that like, our ability, right, are ones where they get exploited along with our other identities. So thank you for lifting that up as well. I think we would probably be remiss if we didn't, just point out, there's something about this is the problem that we all live with. And so I really just want to highlight what Lyric said, earlier about the impact that this has on how you function. And sometimes you just normalize it, right? And so if your baseline is terror, it takes a lot for you to really, recognize the severity of the terror. And so, as both Tiffany and Lyric were speaking, one of the things that stood out to me is like, if you were there and you experienced things that you feel normal, just tell somebody your story. Let them ask you some questions. I'd really encourage you to reach out, because there are things that many of us have learned to normalize that then when you finally take a few steps back, you realize none of this was normal and you weren't registering the peaks and valleys because of your baseline wasn't, right? So I really appreciate both of you for just kind of shifting my perspective a little bit on that as well. And want to offer an opportunity, as we prepare to close, for both of you to give us a final word if there's something you really want to impress upon our listeners. I know we already did our call to action, but if there's something that you want to share with us, I want to give you both a final word on this, because it's just such an important topic and one we can't discuss enough. So start with Tiffany.
Let's start with Lyric.
Final words. I would say, first and foremost, anything involving the activists in your city, so Sacramento, and this lawsuit in particular, share. And I don't just mean share with your activist friends, share with the normies, as I would put them. Another thing, radicalize your friends, your partners, your neighbors, because we're not solving anything if people are not educated about this. Because we can sue them as many times as we want, but as much as people look at us getting brutalized and be like, you kind of deserved it, we're not going to get anywhere. Which takes me back to radicalize your neighbors, understand the root of the problem, and police brutality, emotionally, physically, harassment, is never ever warranted, ever. There is nothing someone can do to deserve to be brutalized by the police. And I'm pretty sure that would be my message to anybody listening.
I appreciate that. And radicalize your neighbors. I like the sound of that, right? I don't think sometimes we even think that's what we're doing when we're sharing our views. But I always cringe a little bit when someone says to me, you shouldn't talk politics or religion. And I'm like, so what you're saying is you don't want to get to know us, right? Like, because what people believe and how they act on those beliefs, which is religion and politics, is absolutely what the foundation of our character and our lives are. And so we should talk about them more. Tiffany, a final word.
Yes. This is something that Lyric mentioned earlier, and that some of our plaintiffs have mentioned before, which is that, the law enforcement are winning, right? Their goal was to make people feel so scared that they don't come out anymore. And the numbers have dwindled significantly. Their goal is to make people feel like they are running into a wall, and to become so fatigued that they no longer want to engage. They have to shut down. And so I offer that to say that the way to win, quote unquote, here is to really make sure you're prioritizing taking care of yourself and each other, to really understand that like the vision that we have beyond this is us being healthy and joyful. And so really to prioritize that. And if it's something that you're having a difficult time imagining, if there's something that you're having a difficult time creating structure around in your own life to create what that vision looks like beyond this terror from law enforcement, to tap in with us, because that's what we're hoping that this case does, is be a part of that larger vision and to be a tool and a lever for that outcome.
That is, that's so, I just am like, I felt a warm hug just then. Lyric and Tiffany, thank you so much for being with us and participating in this conversation. And not only this conversation, but I know that entering into this journey is one that is weighty. It's one that will give you highs and lows, and you're having to carry a lot. In terms of the workload, the emotional labor. And so I just want to like name that, affirm the work that you are both doing, say thank you so much for it. This community really needs you, and we, I know, here at Voices, we see you and we hear you, and we hope that as you continue on this journey, you and the other 5 plaintiffs find time for radical rest, and that you're supported, because I can't imagine how difficult a journey like this is or can be. I don't necessarily know where you're at in that difficulty, or how many cycles of that you might find. So in the same way, Tiffany, that you offered such a lovely blessing, I think, unto us just a bit ago, maybe we return it to you, and really, yeah, just thank you endlessly for being here with us.
Amen and ashe.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Well, to our listeners, you can find us at voicesrivercity.com, Instagram, Voices River City, Facebook, Voices River City. We're on YouTube. We have a store where you can buy all the things with our logo slapped on it.
You can listen to us wherever podcasts are listened to.
Yeah, you can also listen to us locally on KUTZ FM, that's 103.1, or you can stream us from their website, which is kutzfm.org. Thank you to Mickey, who bleeps out all of our fucks every single week.
I love how that sound is gonna show up this episode. That's gonna be awesome.
And to this, the first Voices all women's episode on day 1 of International Women's Day. We got through it. We struggling and striving to tell the story. So, cheers, salud. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Don't hang up yet.